All right, I'm going to get started just introducing our speakers here, and then we'll start the presentation. So this is the Equine Seminar Series. Most of you, a lot of you are regular attendees. So we meet on the third Tuesday of every month during the school year and discuss equine health and management topics with some Cornell-based experts. And so next month we'll be kind of doing what's it like going to the Cornell Equine Hospital from the point of view of some vet techs, which will be exciting. This month, though, has been highly anticipated because if you've ever been around horses, then you've been around mud for sure. And we've gotten a lot of emails already from people saying, this is good timing, I need help and advice. So we have two experts this evening. First, we're going to hear from Steve Kraus. And a lot of you, if you've been attending the seminar for a long time, will know him. He's Cornell's head chief of the farrier service. And he's also a certified journeyman farrier and was inducted into the Hall of Fame for farriers a few years ago. And so he's a pretty cool guy and definitely knows his way around a horse foot. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about the effects on the horse. And then once we're all convinced of the importance of reducing mud, then we're going to hear from Ken Estes, and he's a colleague in Extension. So in addition to having training in kind of land management and sustainability, he also happens to run a Morgan farm in upstate New York. And so he's sees it from both sides for sure. And so he's going to talk a little more on the land management side. And I'm excited to hear from both of them. And if you have any questions, just pop them in the Q&A. And usually we wait till the end to answer most of them, but I can answer a few during. So thanks very much, guys. And we'll start off with you, Steve.
Okay. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm sure there's a lot of familiar faces out there. I guess I'll start off with a pun here. Mud can be a very deep subject, but let's try and be fairly simple about it. And we're going to talk about, seeing what you already know and the effect on horses' feet and what could be done about it and things to make you worry a little bit more so that maybe you'll find a way to do something about it. So first slide, please. There it is. So here's typical what I see. And people think bell boots are going to help keep shoes on. And you look at this horse, how the horse has been running around out in the mud and the bell boots are turned upside down anyway. So when the bell boots sink down into the mud, they just get pushed up. So actually the bell boots don't work. They don't help keep shoes on. We wish they would, but this is typical of not terribly muddy paddock, but a muddy paddock. Obviously they can be worse, which you'll see, but bell boots are not helpful. Overreach boots can be a little bit more helpful because they Velcro down and hook over the heel better. But muddy paddocks are in this region around here, and I've been around here a long time. We have poor draining soil, and horses pretty much wreck the environments that they're in unless you do things to prevent that. And I think this is very overlooked. As a farrier, we hate to see muddy, dripping legs to work on. And quite often somebody wants to hose them off, to hose the mud off. And now we have a wet, cold leg between our legs. So again, best if you're going to hose them off for trimming or shoeing, bring them in earlier and hose them off and let them dry. That would be helpful. But yeah, the mud is a fact of life around here. And I want to mention, yes, we've had mild winters and which actually creates more mud. When we've had the winters that have where we've had a snowpack for several months, that's when the feet are the best. If the horses are on a constant snowpack, whether they're barefoot or shod, we see very little hoof infections. We see feet growing actually more than usual during the winter because they have very perfect stimulation from the snow. And the snow is clean in most cases. So really, the snow is one of the best versions of winter for horses' feet. Next slide. And so, do we want to see horses standing in this kind of mud? I mean, this is terrible. I mean, we're up mid-Cannonbone, and it's hard to maintain a good foot on a horse like this. This level of moisture, constant moisture, just degrades the hoof itself. That where, you know, even if you could nail a shoe on, the nails won't hold. You'll get more likely to have hoof infections. And the proof of that is in this mild winter that we've had, where we've had more mud than usual, I have had to work on more horses with coffin bone infections than usual. And so, which means there's been an unintended abscess, some sharp stone that's in the mud, something small is penetrated, and now the horse needs what we call a coffin bone debriding surgery. And we've seen more of these way more than usual this past year. Next slide. And again, you can see how some horses come in to us. If this horse had been hosed down before, it would make it easier for us to work on the horse instead of having to deal with a soggy, muddy mess. Next slide. And so these are the overreach boots. They're really not doing that much good in deep mud. So you can see if a horse comes in, he's been sinking down up to his fetlock joints. So something you have to manage the paddock area better. Horses don't do well living in this type of environment. Next slide. And you're very likely to get what we call scratches, which is a form of dermatitis. And horses, you can see there's mud that has been tracking most of the way up this horse's Cannonbone. You get these chronic skin infections this way, and you do get coronary band infections, and you get things that are, once they're embedded into the bulbs of the heels and the fetlock joint, very, very hard to get rid of. A lot of extra work, medication, and so on. So definitely, you know, again, another problem with you know, being in the mud, not just in the feet, but the whole limb. Next slide. Lost shoes. Mud doesn't suck shoes off, but we do lose a lot of shoes in mud. And the reason why I can say that I don't believe mud actually sucks the shoes off is that most of the shoes that are lost, probably 80 to 90 or more percent, are front shoes. What the mud does is either hesitates the forward motion of the horse. And so when that foot can't get out of the way because it's either there's suction on the bottom of the foot more than the shoe, especially if there's a pad. But the hoof is just delayed on liftoff. Or in the really deeper mud where we're into fetlock deep mud, the horse is struggling to get his foot out of that hole, and the hind foot is coming down as the front foot is trying to get out of the way and lift off. So mud doesn't suck shoes off. It changes the way the horse is moved, so the horse can't get out of his own way. And if mud was sucking shoes off, we would lose just as many hind shoes as front shoes in the mud. But most of the shoe loss is in front. So when we see, you know, here's a shoe, you can see just not even deep mud, but it definitely, you know, a horse that normally doesn't lose shoes stepped that one off. Next slide. And here are some of the abscesses that we see of all this, these little gritty pieces of particles of stone and mud and everything that just grind their way into the foot. And the thinner the sole, the more likely something can penetrate. and then you've got a chronic abscess and could lead to beyond an abscess, a coffin bone infection, hard to clear up, and again, has to have surgery. Next slide. Here's another one. This is just, this foot has not seen much cleanliness here, and you've got just a gaping hole in there that the horse is kind of, abraded his foot away. Mud, it has a lot of abrasiveness to the hooves on barefoot feet, especially around here. So one of the reasons we don't maybe need to trim horses as often during the winter is partially they grow less hoof because of the length of day is shorter, and that stimulates the hoof growth in the spring when the length of day increases. But also the feet are being worn down in this very abrasive mixture of mud that may penetrate the sole and wear the feet away. Next slide. Sorry if this is before dinner, but these are what some of these coffin bone surgery feet look like, where the surgeons have to go in there and take little pieces of coffin bone away and make sure the coffin bone infection that's there has to be thoroughly cleansed. And then we put a shoe over this with a removable plate. And now for the next several months, this has to be dealt with so that the new foot, the new sole material will grow out. And so this is a long-term healing process. Next slide. White line disease is also prevalent in wet conditions. Again, soft feet are more penetrated by different, organisms. And white line disease is really a fungal infection of the layers of the hoof wall. And then we have to do what's called a toe resection. And the hooves have an appearance similar to a horse with chronic laminitis because we've lost coffin bone stability. And we tend to see horses that have white line disease when they're in wet, muddy conditions for a long period of time. Next slide. And frozen mud isn't any good either because now we've got all these footprints in there and that are rough and hard. And so when we have an open, cold winter, we have horses showing up with, instead of having infections, they have the bad bruises and coffin bone fractures because if they run across this mud or get chased across it, this is just very, very rough, very hard. And so an open winter without snow will create other problems, even if it's cold. There's really no mud now, but a very rough surface for the horses to be walking on. So, horses need help with this. And what I have found the best way with my own horses is if we have a frozen mud area where the horses have to go through, I just take some of the bedding from the stalls and make a pathway, fill in some of these holes. And the horses really, that's where they go. They want to stay off this frozen mud if they're given an opportunity. So if you have a field you're going to be turning these horses out in, you might make a pathway for them just with your old bedding, and they'll walk there and not hurt themselves. Next slide. Here is my barnyard, and you can see there's some hay scattered over there, but the paddock area is pitched away from the barn, and all the roof water does not go into the paddock area, and we use various grades of crusher run stone to give the surface a nice base to it. And all the native soil has been taken out. So all the water has a place to go. That's a big thing when you're doing this. Where is the water coming from that's creating all this mud? If you have water above the area, you can make a diversion ditch to keep water from coming from a higher area. And definitely, if you see in next slide, please. And you can see how after some fresh stone has been put out there. And you see this barn has gutters, so all the roof water goes down to that leader on the right. And then that leader goes underground out way out into the field to daylight. So all the water that comes off that roof does not enter the paddock. Next slide. And just another view of that area, and with that leader coming down and getting all that water. And right next to that, I keep a pile of crushed stone that I can redo the paddock when it needs it and clean it out with the tractor, and then, you know, relayer what anywheres where it has worn away. Next slide. These are slides from a company that makes this product. You see this grid work here. I was just at Equine Affair and this caught my eye. And so this could be a solution to a lot of muddy paddocks here. And you lay this material down, it comes in these rolls, and you just fill it in with crushed stone, and after you graded the area, and this looks like a nice solution. Next slide. You see, this is the grid work that you can buy that they're installing here. And I think that might be my last slide, Ken.
It is.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll answer any questions beyond this. But I just wanted to show you what I do at my house, and we really don't have any mud in our paddock. And there's 6 horses running around.
I think we'll save all the questions for the end, and you can go ahead, Ken.
So hi, friends and fellow Hippolytes. Welcome to tonight's presentation. And now we're going to try to focus a little bit on the preventive measures, the remediation, and some key concepts to mud management. Mud management is a critical aspect of our equine facility design. Horses in muddy environments, as we have learned, are suspect to various health issues. You know, we talk about thrush and pastern issues, dermatitis and cellulitis can lead to lameness and discomfort. Additionally, muddy conditions can result in, you know, pollution and nuisances from insects, posing risks to both horses and their caretakers. Studies have shown horses housed in muddy environments are significant higher risks for developing these problems. As Steve mentioned, these health issues can cause pain and discomfort in horses, and none of us want that. Moreover, muddy conditions can lead to, you know, pollution and increase insects populations, furthering endanger the well-being of our horses and their caretakers. With usual heavy rainfalls and mild winters, mud is an issue all over New York for livestock producers, not just equine. This issue and concern faces all our livestock friends. We face this, you know, almost yearly in our operations. Mud can be dangerous to move equipment in through the winter, hay feeding and maintenance reasons. We can decrease the efficiency of animals. It's been proven that mud will deplete food storage in horses and in livestock. So muddy conditions tend to make horses harder to maintain weight. Areas where animals congregate in high traffic areas tend to be the worst culprits. Those feed and water locations are the areas that are most commonly cause issues related to mud. So what is mud? As defined, mud is a thick liquid mixture of soil and water. So when we look at soil and its impact, based on that definition, we can see that there's 4 basic characteristics of soil types. So you have sand, which is large particle size, can be gritty in textures, and holds little water. We can have silt, medium particle size, smooth, powdery texture, holds a good amount of water. And clay, very small particle size, sticky, plastic-like texture, and holds lots of water. Loam, the other characteristics, is generally classified as like topsoil, which is a combination of clay, sand, and silt. It usually has a crumbly texture and holds just the right amount of water to help things grow. So one of the things that we look at in evaluating a starting point is utilizing what's called the mason jar test. So this is something that you can do, and I'll go over how that process goes. So once you've collected a mason jar with a cover, you would end up filling that mason jar half full of soil. You will fill the remainder of it, of the jar, with water, leaving about a 1-inch air gap at the surface. You would then vigorously shake that mason jar of soil and water mixture, creating a mud. And then you would let that, once you've shaken it for typically 3 minutes or so, till everything's broken down and you're not seeing any more clumping in that soil, in that mixture, you'll then set the jar aside and leave it for 24 hours. During that time, the fines will float to the top, the heavier particles like the sands will float to the bottom, and you'll end up getting a layer, kind of like a sand sculpture that we used to do in school, where you have layers of different soil makeup within the goop. And as we can see from the picture on the right of the makeup of sand, silt, and clay, which one would you think would be worse for a muddy scenario? Well, it'd be definitely the one that has the 50% clay mixture, and the one on the left side, the one that's predominantly sand, typically isn't going to have much of an issue with development of mud because the water is going to be minimized and it's going to filter through that surface. So reasons behind mud. We can look at the photograph to the right, and we definitely have a concern there, both for the soil structure, for the well-being of the horse, for the longevity of this pasture area. It looks like it's a track pasture of some sort where it's a laneway. The primary consideration with that's developing that scenario is both the horse and the weather conditions. So they're doing a disservice to that soil by compacting it, by creating those pockets that create more water holding capacity and create a worse of a problem. Also, contributing factor that can sometimes create mud is the way we graze our pasture. So it has been proven that taller grass will generally mitigate water in that soil by the transformation and the utilization of the water. So when our pastures are overgrazed and we get down to very little soils or very little plant material, it's hard for the soil to get rid of the water by plant life. And then the horse ends up destroying the soil and destroying the ability for the plant to actually survive in those conditions. Additionally, manure plays, or actually any organic matter, plays a role in our management practice and creating mud. Manure actually will create more of a problem with mud scenarios. So it's always better to minimize the amount of manure in our pastures and in our area, specifically if we're looking at them in the conditions like on the right where they're excessively more moist. Because when you compare it to the growing in a garden, we put compost and organic matter in a garden for what? To increase the water holding capacity. And within these pasture scenarios, we want to minimize the water holding capacity to a point where it's at a balance. So some of the ways that we go about in managing and techniques when we're evaluating our equine facility is through study. Through study of topography, through study of the soil characteristics, you know, the flow of water and how we want to develop a water management plan, our water management plan, our manure management plan, and also the grazing system that we employ within our farm, whether it's continuous grazing or we're developing and utilizing, you know, track pastures and rotational grazing systems. So the picture on there just shows a property that shows the grades, the topography. As we can see, the slope of the grade is all going towards the facility and across it. So definitely a drainage system would benefit in mitigating and remediating some of those issues on this property. So prevention is key, and you know, a pound of prevention is you know, worth its weight in gold. So avoiding it is your choice. So when we look at the photographs here, we see that, you know, mud is definitely a problem. We see manure as a problem. It's developing, you know, issues, but the horse can't change it. Only we can. So this is a property where I developed a drainage plan. So in the process of looking, this property slope similar to the one that showed in the plan earlier, where all the water on the property went to the bottom left-hand corner of the property. So developing a drainage plan, looked at remediating both the riding area and the run-ins and the small paddocks. And we utilized a couple different mediums to offload the water. One of them was a rain garden in this concept for here. So when we look at drainage systems, you know, swales and stream fording crossings and drainage systems, these photographs show a couple different options. On the top, we look at collecting downspouts, as Steve mentioned, to minimize the amount of runoff that's going to impact the immediate area around our structures, whether it's a run-in shed or your barn itself. We would collect that and put it into a drain tile of some sort. There's a couple different options as far as tile. I always prefer utilizing SDR 35, which is a plastic smooth interior pipe that has perforation. Smooth tends to hold up a little better to in utilization in horse projects because it's designed for 3,500 pounds of pressure on it, so it will withstand an equipment and the horse weight and not fail. Also utilizing dry wells in some of our soil structures and design mechanisms, utilizing dry wells as an option to collect that water, to put it in a container and let it be able to hold and go into the soil at a much slower rate than what it would be if it's sitting on the surface. The picture on the bottom right just shows you a cross section of what a typical ag drain would look like. With that, it's typically, you know, 24 inches wide. It can vary in depth depending on the rate or the amount of fall that you have to daylight it. So it can be as, you know, shallow as 18 inches or as deep as 5 foot in this example. In this example here, they actually put a geotextile envelope around the perforated stone in the tile. That is a way of creating longevity with it, keeping the fines out of the stone to make it work and last longer. So as we look at another option, like Steve was talking about in his paddock area, was engineering footing and creating surfaces that are engineered to help remediate the amount of water and move that water away, or just create a hard surface for the animals to be able to move around and stand on without being in the mud. So on the upper right-hand corner shows us a schematic of a general dry lot construction. It's very similar to what if you were putting in a patio on your property. It's very similar in construction. So it has a compacted, you compact the existing soil. You end up putting a layer of crushed stone, which crushed stone is goes from it's an angular stone that also has fines in it. So when it's compacted, it ends up locking up similar to what concrete would be like that. Would be like. And then we put a finer grade stone, a layer of that, typically 2 inches, which can be a finer crusher run, like a 3/8 or a 5/8 crusher, or potentially stone dust to kind of seal that surface and create a barrier for the coarser stone to be protected from the horse's foot with that. And then typically I top dress with about a 1-inch layer of sand. And the sand is kind of sacrificial. So the sand will stick to their feet and migrate out of the area. So that's something as far as maintenance goes, you would need to potentially maintain that on a 3 to 5 year where you're top dressing with sand. Sand also makes a good median for doing manure removal from, as your manure fork can go into the sand and it's much easier to remove it. It's kind of like having going through fine shavings. So on the other 2 pictures that are showed there are just some side views of kind of a traditional compacted base where the subsurface and the compacted areas are all set up on a slope, so the water ends up landing on the surface and then runs away. And this also utilizes a geotextile. The thing with a geotextile, it creates a barrier between the soil and the compaction area. It also spreads weight out, so it makes it much harder for the foot or the equipment to go down through it by bridging the soil. On the right, it's using a little bit different design where they're incorporated some under drain, where the engineering of it is wanting the water to go down through the surface and go towards those drains and removed through the drainage system. In this schematic, they're putting the geotextile at the soil base, the sub base, and also above that perforated stone layer where they're having the fine sand median on the surface with that. And here's another, this is just a hybrid design on the upper right-hand corner where they're doing kind of all the things together. So they're doing the surface with a slope. Usually it's about a 1 or 2% slope minimum for the surface water to move away. They're allowing water to go through it and go to the drain. And then as Steve mentioned, there are lots of options as far as engineered surfaces. They are primarily to prevent shearing or the movement of the gravel and to potentially create less of a need for base. So if you have a predominantly clay soil, you're looking at creating a hard surface that may be 12 inches deep between the 3 layers. These structures allow you to minimize that depth that you're going to need by the engineering of the structure, spreading the weight out and creating a surface that's more durable than just the stone alone. You know, when you compare the two, they're both doing the same things as far as the engineering practice. Some may be more cost prohibitive depending on your location. You know, if stone is more expensive than the engineered structure, you may end up wanting to do comparative pricing on whether the surface is the same. And also, I didn't have a photograph, or I didn't include a photograph. You know, there's a product called Mud Mat that actually eliminates the gravel altogether and kind of floats over the existing soil as a short-term and a long-term remediation tool. So kind of in conclusion, the key takeaways that I want to, impose on you is the impact of soil. Soil is probably the biggest consideration that we're looking at in the development of why some have worse mud conditions than others. Regular maintenance is key to managing our paddocks and soil areas to prevent the mud from being worse. Implementing of drainage systems in some scenarios and some of these extreme photographs that we've witnessed tonight, drainage is, something that we're going to have to do. So, the implementation of our preventative measures to minimize that water and soil mixture. So if we can minimize the amount of water that's entering our paddock areas and our pastures, we're going to have less of a concern for mud. So there are resources and tools out there that are there for your benefit. One of those is Soil and Water Conservation District. The people that are in those roles within counties throughout New York State provide assistance, technical, and advice in creating drainage plans. They, help with soil group worksheets and help you figure out the soil. They help you in the design and layout of your pastures and paddocks. They also are a key component in, assessing, ag value, creating conservation and environmental management plans, as well as ag districts. The Natural Resource Conservation Service is also a resource. They're there to provide environmental quality incentive programs that provide resources, financial resources to help you with some of these projects if you qualify. There's programs like the Conservation Reserve Program and the Conservation Stewardship Program that can assist you with your long-term, both your short-term and your long-term goals. Cornell Cooperative Extension and Cornell University Ag and Life Sciences are there also as a tool in your toolbox to assist you with soil testing, pasture management, business management, etc. And they are in every county in New York State. Additionally, the Horse Farm Improvement Program is an excellent resource if you're looking at trying to develop an overall comprehensive plan or just look at specific aspects. Additionally, your local assessor can help with the assessment if you're looking at, ag value assessment and allowing, reduction in property taxes for land use for agricultural production. Some of those have income restrictions that allow you to qualify, but there are resources out there. That's one of the things that I wanted to kind of make you aware of, that the extension agent and these other consulting options for you are there to support you and should be utilized, because it's your tax dollars are paying for them in a lot of ways. So I want to thank you for your attention, and we can answer some questions.
There are many, so I'm glad we have some time. Some for both of you, I believe. One of the first questions that someone was just wondering, what grade of stone do you use? And does it vary?
So grade of stone will depend on where you're located in the state. They're classified differently, but typically it's a crushed limestone is the base material. And I typically, depending on the depth, I will go with coarser stone. Number one crusher is a pretty standard base material. And then I will, in that mid layer, either use a 5H crusher or a stone dust, and those classifications. So 1 inch is the screen is 1 inch minus, so a 1 inch stone will go through it, or everything below that size will go through the thing. That's the same for the other two classifications.
Great, thank you. And this maybe is a little more for Steve. This person's asking if your horse is stuck in a muddy pasture during turnout, and then they come in at night, is there anything you can do while they are in a stall to help prevent hoof breakdown?
Well, I think, yeah, getting the horse in a dry area is helpful. And I guess, maybe either brushing or knocking the mud off and picking the feet out would be helpful, just to remove all that, wet material that's packed into his feet, and let the shavings in the stall like absorb, help dry the feet out a little bit. So just cleaning the horses off before they're in for the night would, kind of break that cycle a little bit. And then the other thing that we don't seem to see anymore, they used to be pretty common in stalls to prevent hoof infections, whether it be thrush or white line disease problems, things like that, is nobody uses hydrated lime anymore, from what I can see. And maybe that a nice layer of that underneath your bedding has a great effect on keeping, things that are trying to grow on your horse's feet in check. So, look into that, I would say too. But just, getting the horse into a dry area is helpful as long as you clean them up before you bring them in.
Right, okay, so dry whenever possible.
Right.
Dry, okay. And then I think someone, Ken was unclear on what the brand you said, Mud Mat?
So Mud Mat is a brand that is similar to what those structures were, but it's a plastic interlocking,
Mhm.
for lack of a better term, paver
Like a
that
grid kind of, yeah.
yeah, they're a grid. They connect together by a pin system, kind of like a suspension floor that you would put in a patio or with that. So they kind of float over the surface, so they don't necessarily eliminate the water problem. They kind of put
Like
a bridge
barrier
over the
for-
top of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they put a bridge over the top of it. In bad water and bad mud scenarios, they can come up through it. But they're a good option. They're not necessarily a cheap option, but they are a tool that many people utilize for creating those pathways across muddy areas or around those high traffic areas in front of your run-in sheds or around your watering tubs. I haven't done any 100% cost comparison, but I always lean towards creating an engineered surface over those remediation tools because they're usually a long-term investment in the welfare of your animal.
Mhm. Yeah, the price can get high if over large areas especially, right? This is something
Right.
I've always as a veterinarian, I know not much about land management, and so this is a question that I can relate to. Is what's the drawback of just putting sand over the native soil? Just straight up.
So
get some.
as a remediation tool, it's effective. It's a little cost prohibitive. So, when we looked at the jar test in the clay soil and the sand mixture, if you can increase the amount of sand to clay ratio, you're going to have a less water holding capacity. The only problem that you end up running into is if your base or your predominantly clay soil, you're still going, it's still going to hold the water. You're just going to have a surface that may not be as quite as wet. So it's, clay ends up being the base for a pond. You fill a pond with sand and it's still holding water. It's still, the water still can't get through it, but yeah,
Okay.
it is a tool.
Right, and maybe I should comment also as a vet, the person asked about using several inches of sand, and you just want to be careful making any footing too deep. I think both Steve and Ken would agree with that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think the key to it, I mean, there's several different points that are key to it. One is removing some of the, the native soil if it's possible, and not having other water enter the area other than what falls from the sky. So, getting water diverted and not entering, because the horses just mix it up, and that's all there is to it. There's no way to stop that.
That's all true. I agree. So someone would specifically like to know, Steve, what type of stone do you use on your farm?
It's a crushed limestone, like Ken described.
Mhm.
And I use the multiple crushed limestone with stone dust. So fairly small, crusher run for the base, and then the stone dust is on top of it, is usually the replacement surface, that kind of seals it up. I like it better than sand personally. And it has to be replaced occasionally, because what we do is, if we do get a little bit of a manure buildup, even though we try and pick up manure that we see piles standing, and then you throw some hay out there sometimes, and they don't eat all the hay, and it needs to be kind of gently scraped off I think once a year. I kind of clean it up, scrape it off, and then from that pile of extra stone dust, I layer it back on. And I only have like a good 1/2 to 1 inch layer over that base that's already there, which is the crusher run stone that Ken talked about.
Actually, that's a good segue into another attendee's question, asking about what to put in areas where you're feeding the horse. So, people are often wary of feeding on sand in case the horse ingests it. Any comments on feeding area maintenance?
I don't seem to have any
So
problem.
what I do with
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, with the horses eating hay off the stone dust.
Okay, how about you, Ken?
So I do two different things. So when I'm feeding directly on the surface without a tire as a feed tool, I'll put mats down. So I'll feed on rubber mats as a feed source, or where the hay specifically sets. But with the ag tires with a rubber mat inside of those is what I utilize to keep the hay up off the surface of the sand, so they're not actually feeding the sand or eating the sand.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think that's a good idea.
He's full of good ideas. So this is an interesting question. So this person's saying, part of my barn sits below an inclined slope. They have a French drain in that area. And they're asking, how do I keep the silt that travels downhill to it from covering the stones, or how do I clean it out?
So that's a challenge. It's pretty
Yeah.
typical. In fact, I was at a property yesterday exploring a similar scenario. So you installing a curtain drain or a French drain at the point of water entering is great. So typically I would wrap like that that diagram that I showed. I would wrap the drainage stone in a fabric that would let water go through it, but not let fines go through it. And then you're just going to have to maintain that surface. Typically, I will cover it with, a coarse sand, something that'll let the water go down through it. And that you may have to maintain to keep the fines out of the area. Yeah, that's a little bit of a challenge, but it's definitely a benefit to have the that drainage system, or to keep the water from sheeting down and entering right into your shed or into the area adjacent to it.
Mhm. And I should maybe say this out loud. I wrote it in the chat, but just be careful if using tires. A lot of them, I think most of them have metal in them, and they can ingest that, which obviously can be pretty scary. So you got to be really careful.
We removed that wire bead.
Yeah, so you have to be careful. You make sure you're kind of checking them and not using any that have wire left in them. And then, so this is an interesting question. Well, it's hard to answer, but what are some basic measures to take if these management ideas aren't affordable for the size of the paddock that someone has? Any ideas from either of you? I always say you can try creating a smaller sacrifice lot that has some of these. If you have a really large paddock that you just can't afford to mitigate the entire area, you can try creating a smaller area that's less muddy. It makes it a little more affordable
I
if it's
agree.
smaller. Yeah.
Yeah, developing sacrificial areas that, when it's really bad, you can bring them into that smaller area. I've seen people utilize, track pastures to minimize the damage that can take place on their pasture to kind of preserve and protect it. But yeah, and some of it, you can do the remediation with a shovel too. Like in some of those pictures that we saw, just by creating areas for the water to migrate through, driving your four-wheeler or your, tractor to make a track to let the water out of the area, are remediation tools that, are can help.
Great. Okay. And then you addressed this a little bit when you talked about resources, but someone's asking, what's the best resource available for planning a drainage system? Contacting Extension, it sounds like, is high on your list.
So I would reach out to your soil and water conservation district. Most of those offices have the technical knowledge to help you design a system. They're doing it for the ag community, for commercial ag. So they have the knowledge about what can be done and what can't be done. They can pull up the schematics of your topography and help you work through the best way to, flow that. And, the extension is a little bit kind of hit and miss, where you're going to find an educator that may have the knowledge. I might be a little bit of a few of us have this knowledge, I guess, but definitely soil and water conservation. Also construction and landscape contractors can be a source to help with drainage. Those specific ones that deal with that. And my recommendation always is, talk to more than one person if you can. You can get, better insight and better ideas from multiple people than relying on one.
Just like we have this evening. And then Steve, this is a question probably for you. Someone said they'd heard that that the change going wet to dry back and forth can be rough on a horse's hooves. And they're asking, is it still advantageous to bring them into the stall to let them dry out, even if they're going to go right back out into the...
Yeah, I don't think that's, we're talking what, 10 or 12 hours overnight, that you're not going to get that much drying done. You're just going to kind of give the horse's foot a little bit more stability. The thought on that is, if we have, for instance, start off the summer and it's really dry, and then we get 2 weeks of rain, and then the feet kind of like absorb a lot of moisture and really explode. and then we get, 2 more weeks of drying or so, then the feet start to contract. So that's what that refers to. But overnight, you're not going to see that much of a difference.
So it's over a longer time course that you get. a
Right,
little
yeah,
bit more worried about
yeah,
that. Okay.
definitely over. But that's a good thought because we do complain about the back and forth of moisture conditions in some of these summers and how feet just don't stay stable. Dry, dry, dry is always the best.
Mhm.
Dry with a little moisture in between is also helpful, but extremes are the thing that causes some of those problems.
Mhm. Okay, great, thank you. And then someone's asking, what is a rain garden?
So a rain garden is a landscape tool, but it's a, a depression in the ground that you can put plants that are able to withstand flooding or high water, and they will also handle drought conditions. So it's a kind of a catch basin filled with sand, soil, a higher quantity of a sand soil mixture. And it has plants in it that kind of use transformation to utilize that water and create an area for the water to be able to go in the ground at a much slower rate.
Awesome, thank you. And this is kind of a combo question, I guess, that are asking, is it possible to use a tractor blade to intermittently clear out manure rather than picking it if you're using one of these surfaces that you're recommending?
Yeah, so like Steve had mentioned, my dry lots that have an engineered surface, sometimes we're not the best managers and we're not cleaning every day. So we get buildup, especially in the wintertime when we get snowfall and we get manure mixed in with the snow. It's harder to clean up. So creating that base material, you can actually, if it's done well and compacted well, you can utilize that as a hard surface and scrape the manure off in a bucket, and not have minimum damage and have efficiency as far as removal of it. I utilize that all the time.
Yeah, I back drag with my bucket loader, and there's a setting on it that will allow the bucket to float, so you're not really digging. And if I back drag gently, I'm not losing very much of my good material underneath, and it's just gently pulling the buildup of any manure and hay, into like a windrow, and then I can just scoop that right up very nicely. So it's just technique is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I worry with those engineered wafer systems that a bucket and a tractor might damage those scraping.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that in use, and definitely the mud mat that floats on the surface, using equipment to do that is problematic, I think.
Thank you guys. And then
Yep.
Steve, this is more for you, I guess. How abrasive is sand on horse hooves?
How abrasive is sand? It's used in a lot of riding rings, and horses are working barefoot. So there is a little bit of abrasion occurring, but unless most people are not riding for hours on end in a sand ring, for instance, or horses are not in a sand paddock. If they're moving around, they're not doing it with a lot of impulsion. They're just more leisurely. So I'm not too worried about the sand.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much. It's 7 o'clock now, so we're going to respect everyone's time and wrap up for the evening. Thank you guys all for attending. We're going to send out an email to everyone who registered with the recording, so it should be in about a week. And if there was a question we didn't have time to get to, you can reach out to us. And then we'll also share all of the resources that were shared during the presentation in that email. So thank you both so much, Steve and Ken. It's been great. And thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you in a month to talk about the Cornell Equine Hospital.
Good night.
Good night.